Thank you.
All right.
You go ahead.
My
You
name
go
is
ahead.
Elijah Boyd. I'm the U.S. Labor Party candidate for
Yeah.
mayor of what's left of New York City. Now, there are so many objectionable things that you've said in your talk that, in the interests of getting at the bottom of your philosophy and the institutions that you represent, as opposed to the philosophy and institutions that I represent, I would like to challenge you to
I'm
an
delighted
open
to have you
public
challenge
debate
me.
on economic policy and how we get the world out of this depression.
Well, I'm afraid that's not the subject matter of this session today. It's a subject I have talked extensively about. Whether it is a most effective use of my time to debate you publicly in New York is a different question. Whether it is or not, it's not, I'm afraid, within the bounds of reason at the moment. So do you have a question you would like to raise about the content of what I have said here tonight?
Yeah, you specifically excluded mention of two things, namely the public unions, and secondly, the massive growth of debt service and public indebtedness of New York City, which is by and large the most important problem in not merely the educational system here, but the fact that this entire city is being subjected to the kind of Hayalmar Shaktian economics that is causing this city to virtually disappear. It is precisely the kind
Well, I am
of
not
economic
going to,
policies
excuse me,
that you have proposed
I beg
and saw
you-
implemented in Chile that you are representing right here in this discussion.
Let us try to see if we can get out the little element of your comment which is really relevant to our discussion here. So far as trade unions are concerned, there is no doubt that the emergence of strong city unions has been a serious element of the problem of not only New York City as a whole, but of the educational problem. It's part of the reason why the costs of schooling in this city are so high. Again, a voucher system, by providing alternatives, by providing competition, would tend to reduce the possibility of the control which the unions have exercised, the stranglehold which they have been able to exercise. I have no objections to unions, provided there are alternatives and they are voluntary. As to the interest cost and the debt service, that really has very little to do with why it is that current operating costs of schools in New York City, independent of interest, independent of capital costs, are the highest in the nation.
That is an outright lie, and that's why I challenge you to a debate.
Well,
Let me
I am
reiterate
sorry,
my
I am
challenge.
sorry. I think we have given you a chance. I think we will take the next question.
All right,
Yes, sir.
Dr. Freeman. My name is Bill Hall. I have two questions to ask.
Yes, sir.
We hear a lot said against public education by people such as yourself and others. Can you tell me and those in the audience who are those that are advocating the present system? Are there people who are talking about the present system?
What do you mean, who are the people who are advocating the present
Well,
system?
you indicate that you find that you find some problems with the way schools are currently run.
I would suppose that that was the understatement of the evening.
Right, okay. What I'm interested in is that there does not seem to be a debate. There does not seem to be people on the other side advocating what exists.
Nobody is advocating what exists.
Okay.
But the self-interest of people on the other side is keeping them from accepting the only effective cure.
Who are those individuals or organizations?
Those individuals or organizations? Well, as I was mentioning before, in the cases in which I have had direct contact with them, in Michigan, they're the Michigan Educational Association. In the city of New York, I take it they're the American Federation of Teachers. I take it they are in New Hampshire, where I had contact with them. They were the superintendents of schools. They were the local board, some of the local representatives of the educational administration, the superintendent of schools, the supervisors, and so on. Now, all of them recognize the problems. Many of them recognize the problems, of course, but they are in a bind because they regard what I believe is the only effective solution, which is greater power to parents, as a threat to their position. As I said before, I have no quarrel with them as individuals. They're decent human beings. They're not doing this because they want to produce bad education. I never would say anything like that at all. On the contrary, I think especially among the teaching staffs. There are many devoted, dedicated teachers who, under terrible conditions, are trying to do the best they can. All I'm saying is I can only see one effective way to enable them really to do it. I may say, I don't believe teachers in general are opposed to the voucher system. I have talked to many teachers who have said to me, I would much rather teach in the kind of schooling system that would develop under a voucher arrangement, where the students would be coming there of their own free will, where they would be choosing my school to come to. I would much rather teach in that kind of a school, but I don't have that possibility now. So I'm not questioning the intent or the desires or the aims of people. They are caught up in a system, and they are in a box where they believe, erroneously I think, that their self-interest would be hurt by shifting to a voucher scheme. My own belief is that the teachers would be among the biggest beneficiaries of a voucher system. They would be able to do their job. They would no longer have to be disciplinarians.
The reason I ask that question is that it certainly doesn't endear many of us who are a part of that enterprise that you're criticizing when there doesn't seem to be any effective options currently. The other question that I have deals with the voucher system.
Sure.
Is it the intent of the voucher system to break up the monolith, to make public education more dynamic, more competitive?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If the voucher system were uniformly applied, you see, the next stage is to apply it to the public school system itself. The next stage is to say, not only those parents who choose to take their child out of the school, but every parent will get a voucher. And he can use it anywhere he wants to. If he wants to use it at a public school, he can use it at a public school. And then the public schools would have to charge a tuition equal to the sum on the voucher, and they would have to finance themselves out of the proceeds from the voucher. As I said, I believe that the vouchers system is the only system that will save the public schools. It won't destroy the public schools. On the contrary, how can you destroy a system more effectively than it's destroying itself now? I have nothing to offer in that direction. They have everything to teach me. But what the voucher system would do would be to offer a way to turn that thing around and provide a creative move and a movement toward improving the public school system rather than making it worse. Look, I personally grew up in a small town in New Jersey. I went to a public elementary school. I went to a public high school. I went to Rutgers University on a state scholarship. So I'm not a person who can really turn up my nose at public schooling, and I'm not trying to do it. And I think that there was a time when it was serving a very, very useful function very effectively. But I think the increasing bureaucratization, the increasing centralization of authority has converted what was at one time a responsive system into an utterly unresponsive machine, which is grinding the students under its wheels as well as the teachers.
Thank you.
My name is Matthew Mead. I'm a member of the faculty of Medgar College of the City University of New York. And I'd like to question you on your voucher system. It seems to me that fundamentally it assumes perfect competition, meaning, of course, that you have a homogeneous product that's being offered to consumers.
Not at all.
I'll continue. That, in fact, there are large numbers of sellers and buyers, and those kinds of things. And additionally, it seems to me that what is not considered, at least you gave very short shrift to, the fact that racism, which of course is an aspect that economic theory has not developed a well-developed theory in order to handle, is sort of like assumed away in your model. Let me suggest that at the higher level, we have, in fact, the voucher system, as you sort of said earlier in your speech. That is that anyone can choose any of the private universities and or state colleges and to go to. However, in this society where racism does exist, what happens is that individuals whose abilities are retarded by environmental racism, et cetera, do not have the same choice and ability to go to, for example, the Harvards and the Yales and Columbia, as, for example, other students who may not be so afflicted. So what can possibly happen, though, even though under your system, you might have an increase in the general level of scholarship among all students, if in fact there's no relative change within this system, you still have the situation that employees are obviously going to take the best, which is going to be a white upper strata, leave the rest, which is going to be a black and minority lower strata. And in fact, even though all scores, board scores and everything have raised, the level of marginal product has to be met, which is also now higher, you in fact haven't solved the problem. So again, even though it's possible to have an increase in the general level of schooling in the system, you can still be left with the fundamental problem that the people who finish relatively on the lower level are going to be left with their problem. And I think that your voucher system doesn't appeal to that. And we see, for example, now University of California, Davis, for example, the famous Bakke case, where a 35 or 38-year-old man is suing because some students with lower scores entered and so on. So again, to conclude, the fact that the institutions themselves also have a choice in the matter. It's not just the consumer. The producer, the school, can decide not to accept the student if, in fact, he's filled up his quota with the best of students.
Well,
so
let's
your voucher
examine-
system, although it might, as I say, make marginal changes, is not a panacea, and it should not be.
Of course
pushed
it's
that
not a
way.
panacea. There are no panaceas. But in the particular terms you're raising, you've got the situation exactly upside down. In my opinion, there is not a single thing you could do in this world that would do more to improve the condition of the black people who have in the lowest income classes, of the black people who have been most affected by discrimination. There is not anything that you could do that would be more effective than the voucher scheme. Why? Because as I said to you before, and I challenge anybody to deny that there's no respect in which the black in the slum is more deprived than in the quality of schooling he can get. He's much worse off in that respect than he is even in the quality of housing he can get, than in the quality of the automobile he can buy, in the quality of the job he can get with given education. I agree with you that the poor educational qualifications have had further effects carry through life in leading him to have few opportunities to improve his economic conditions. But if we want to improve his economic conditions, we want to enable him to be a more productive, a more valuable, a more useful person. And the way to do that is, first of all, to improve his schooling. And how do we improve his schooling? The only effective device that there is for improving his schooling that anybody has suggested is to give the parents more control, to introduce the competition and the drive of private market to improve the quality of the schooling that is available to them. Now you say, I assume perfect competition, I assume, those are all words. I don't assume anything of the kind. I assume that you have a world of the kind you have. In this world of the kind you have, you do not have perfection. That's for the next world. We'll have to wait till we get there, and we don't look forward to it very much. In this world, you have imperfection. The question is, how do we have the least imperfect world? We're not going to eliminate all problems. We're not going to eliminate feelings of racism. Of course not. But we can try to follow policies which will minimize their adverse effects. We can try to follow policies which will give those people who have a desire to improve their own conditions, who have no prejudice, who want to hire people. We want to have a society in which they have the greatest opportunity to do so. By introducing competition, by making it possible to have a variety of different schools and different choices, you say, well, just consider what would happen. If the parents in Harlem, each one of them separately, had the possibility of disposing of $1,500 per child per year for the schooling of that child, do you mean to say that there wouldn't be a flowering of schools of all kinds? I'll bet there are a dozen people in this room who would set up schools to try to meet that demand. Look at what's happened with those small private schools that have been set up under tremendously difficult circumstances. If I go to the other end of the country, if I go to Oakland, California, there's a small preschool school in the suburbs of Oakland set up by the Black Panthers in California. It's the most effective preschool school that there is around there. It's done a better job than any other of the schools in giving the kids who come to it an opportunity really to get an education. So I'm pleading your case, sir. You really, if you'll pardon me, you are repeating in your words formulae you've learned. You are not thinking for yourself.
Sir.
Look at the world as it is.
With all due respect, I did say that it is possible to improve generally the school system.
I'm talking
But I
about
said
the
that
bottom.
that does not necessarily mean that if you don't improve positions relatively, that you're going to have any change.
you would improve
And I
them
say also
relatively.
that the higher university system has provided a kind of laboratory experiment in which crucial problems still exist because you have small numbers of people, minority people, who are able to go to Harvard, to able to go to Yale, your University of Chicago, etc. And I say that those kinds of criticisms must be confronted, because otherwise you now mislead the people that all you have to do is somehow have a kind of free market system, and people are going to be able to purchase a product which, for example, unlike in a private firm, he can deny that product to you. If I go to a corporation under the law,
Excuse me.
he cannot. But
We're gonna
at
have
the
to-
university, he
we're
can
gonna
deny
have to-
admission.
We're going to have to terminate this.
Fine.
But I just want to make one more statement along your line. In every proposal I have ever made for the voucher scheme, I have said that it shall be perfectly consistent with the law, that vouchers be usable only in schools which do not discriminate with respect to race. That provision can be made just as effectively under a voucher scheme as it can under any other scheme.
Sir,
And it would be,
I did not
me,
say that it would be discriminated on the basis of race. When you go to buy a car, no one's going to ask you whether or not you have dirty clothes or whatnot. If
Exactly.
you have effective demand,
Right.
you're able to purchase a
And
car.
I'm gonna
If you
gi-
present yourself at the University of Chicago, you also must present a grade point average, which is a function of your environment and other kinds of
But that
considerations.
isn't the problem at the first grade.
Well-
The reason you have the problems you cite at the university
The
level.
Head Start program was denied that then. I mean, there was
The
a Head
problem, the
Start.
reason you did not have, you have the problems at the university level is in large part, not wholly. Of course, you're not going to solve all problems. You're not going to overnight
Yes, I know,
create
life is tough,
heaven on
but
earth.
still.
Life is tough. The problem is, how do we move in the right direction? How do we get off of this descent and turn the other way? Let's give some of the
Okay,
other
let's
people
see.
an
At the
opportunity.
age of even 4 years old, there's already deprivation which is set in. So you do have the
Maybe so.
problem also
I
in the
want to
first-
do. I
first
want to
grade.
do what
Thank
I
you.
can not to intensify that. Let's have the next question. Yes.
Dr. Friedman, my name is George Basak. I'm a lawyer, and I am committed also to the struggle for freedom of educational choice. And I agree wholeheartedly with just about everything you've said, but I feel that maybe it just doesn't go far enough. I identify the issue also as freedom of educational choice. And certainly compulsory governmental education infringes upon that freedom. And I think when we look for the justification for the infringement on the freedom, the only possible one that would make any sense would be the interest of the state in an educated citizenry. The problem, however, is that the means which have been employed to accomplish that objective seem totally foreign to its accomplishment. And the reason I feel that there is another step beyond your comments is that I would identify the failure of that system to accomplish the objective to the fact that government in education is an enterprise. While we speak in terms of competition and so forth, I think that the people who are holding the strings for the construction of schools, for the staffing of schools, and so forth, view it as their own little business.
Sure.
So that I think when we talk in terms of continuing public school systems, as opposed to the interest of the state in an educated citizenry, we are in trouble. For example, as an example, let's take your voucher idea. I think that the voucher idea is a great idea, but I see no point to a voucher system for one who has no need of money from the government to educate his children. If we consider, for example, a wealthy person getting a voucher, it would make no sense. Best description I heard was at a meeting of lawyers in which one lawyer said that type of voucher system, that is for everyone, would be like giving yourself a transfusion from the left arm to the right arm and you lose a gallon of blood in the process. You really don't need a voucher for the wealthy person, you just make a greater bureaucracy. I think it's the people here that need the vouchers. And I think that the voucher should be based on need. If we could establish a need factor, then we would need less bureaucracy to handle the vouchers.
On the contrary, you need the bureaucracy to determine need.
Yes, but the number of people whose vouchers would be being handled would be diminished enormously.
No, but I beg your pardon, I don't agree with it all with that view. I think that everybody in this, every man at the moment, whatever his wealth, is under our present laws. Whether he should be or not is another question, but under our present laws, he is entitled to send his child to a public school. Your argument, if it made sense, your argument would imply that public schools should be available without tuition charge,
No, I say-
only on demonstrated need.
No.
Now, every parent, regardless of his income, is now entitled to send his child to a public school. If he chooses not to send his child to the public school, he is saving the community money. He is paying his share of the taxes. And I think it is very important to separate out this question of taxes. If you think that the taxes on the wealthy aren't high enough, then propose higher taxes. But let's not get that mixed up with the problem of education. On the question of compulsion, I have a great deal of sympathy with the view you've expressed. But I like to separate issues. I want to take up one thing at a time. It's hard enough to try to make this one modification. If we succeed in making this one modification, then I will welcome you to join with me perhaps in going further. Because I think that there is a very, on a purely intellectual level, I have very great difficulty with the concept of compulsory schooling. But at the moment we have compulsory schooling. And at the moment I think it is utopian to suppose that we're going to do anything very much about that. We don't have compulsory education. Don't misunderstand that. We don't have any compulsory education at all. We have compulsory schooling. Not all schooling is education. And not all education is schooling.
May I just offer this by way of rebuttal, that I think you have demonstrated in talking about the theory of bureaucratic displacement and so forth, that when the government gets into any area of enterprise which involves the individual freedom, it is inevitable that it will overtake the whole enterprise. And I think that to assume that government schooling would continue on a modified basis with this voucher system that you propose, without inevitably, again, eating up the competition because of the tremendous amount of public monies available to it, I think inevitably we'd be right back where we started.
Well, I'm afraid the evidence is not on your side. It so happens that Denmark has maintained this kind of a dual system for something like 100 years. And the free part of the Denmark system, where they have it's a small part of it, most of it is public, but there are also free, what they call free schools, which are essentially a voucher kind of school. They have maintained a stable part of the system for a long time.
I don't think they have the political
But let me
atmosphere
only say to you, I have a good deal of sympathy with that argument too.
Yep.
But here we have a situation where we are. And our problem is how to go from where we are to where we would like to be. Vouchers would involve less bureaucracy than our present system. They would involve less government control than our present system. I don't see any way to create utopia on earth overnight. I think we've got to do it gradually and in a way which is acceptable. Yes.
Dr. Friedman, I'm Barry Farber, conservative candidate for mayor.
Boy, I'm sorry to have gotten involved in this mayoral campaign. I am not a New Yorker, and I am not a mayoral candidate. Let me make one statement to everybody. I am not a mayoral candidate.
I disagree with you sharply in only one respect. I don't think you lack the imagination for anything that you would care to fantasize. You said your imagination was not broad enough to cover what might happen if there were a voucher system. I want you to try to guess what Harlem would look like and live like 1 year after a voucher system. And the second part of the question is, you know, on paper, if you give a parent $3,000, let's say that's the cost per child, the school system breaks even. If you give him $1,500 cash, the school system is $1,500 ahead. But in theory, we know good and well that we're talking about fixed capital expenses, and if you give him $1,500, the city is out $1,500. If you give him $1, the city is out $1 in real money. Now, is there a way to keep from administering too much medicine too fast that might kill the patient. That 3-year-old girl endeared herself to us by saying to her father, what if they gave a war and nobody came? Well, what if they gave a voucher system and everybody came?
Well, in the first place, if they gave a voucher system and everybody came, personally, I would regard that as fine. But in the second place, you needn't worry about that problem. And the reason you needn't worry about that problem is because it takes time for alternatives to develop. Just as it takes time for a business to build up and develop and create. And in the same way, if you start on a voucher scheme, I think a year from now, the effect in Harlem would be very small. A year from now, you would see 12 schools around. You would see some dedicated groups of parents mostly, who would have organized themselves into setting up voucher schools, and they would be able to use the money they got from the vouchers. I think if you look 5 years ahead, the story would be different. By that time, you would have a great many prosperous enterprises in Harlem. If you want to talk about giving opportunity for minority employment and for minority entrepreneurs, I cannot think of any industry which would be more capable of doing it than the voucher industry. So in 5 years, it would go. Now let's go to your question. What about school expenses, the city's expenses? It is true that if you made the voucher equal to the school's expenses, the school would lose on that deal for 2 reasons. First, there are some students now who go to private schools and who cost the city nothing, and they would be entitled to vouchers. That's one of the main reasons for suggesting that the voucher be about half what it is now, because that gives you that leeway. But second, the figures I gave were not capital costs, but current operating costs of the schools. In addition to that, total capital costs, including amortization and interest, are higher than I've described. Those other costs will continue, but they aren't going to be affected one way or another. If you reduce the number of pupils in the schools, you will be able to reduce the ongoing current costs. You won't be, first of all, people will say, but you've got these contracts with teachers. How are you going to, what are you going to do about them? No problem. Because they will be shifting from the city school, public schools to the voucher schools as the voucher schools emerge. So you will simultaneously be reducing the burden on the city school and increasing the amount. It was entirely precisely to meet the kind of problem you're talking about now that we wanted to have demonstration projects in Connecticut and in New Hampshire in order to try these things out. And unfortunately, I am sorry we couldn't have some trial projects.
Well, I congratulate you for your imagination, your concept, and your presentation of both.
Thank you very much. I am sorry to say we're going to have to close this off. I wish we had more time, but our time is up. Thank you very much.